All right, so picture this. You're at a family gathering,
Mhm.
and you just know, like, something's not right with your father-in-law, even though everyone else thinks he seems totally fine.
Oh, wow.
And that's what happened to this paramedic we were reading about, and it turns out she was totally right. The guy was having a heart attack.
It's like a sixth sense almost.
Yeah, and that's what this whole deep dive is about,
And it's about
and how
hats.
they can be just as subtle and powerful as, a paramedic's intuition.
Absolutely.
We're going to be breaking down a whole chapter on this, exploring, how habits form, how we can become aware of them. And, the big question, how do we actually change them?
It's amazing how much our brains are running on autopilot, right? We
Mm.
think we're in control, but so much of our behavior is driven by these habits that we've developed over time.
It's true. It's like I was reading this anecdote about this retail clerk who kept automatically cutting credit cards even after the store got these new card readers that didn't require it.
Yeah.
It was just so ingrained in her to do that, she didn't even realize.
The cue of seeing the credit card just triggered that automatic response.
Right. It's like our brains are constantly scanning for these familiar cues to trigger these, automatic responses.
Exactly. And those cues can be anything. It could be the time of day, a certain location, even an emotion. Like I know for me, when I'm feeling stressed, I tend to reach for sugary snacks.
Oh, yeah, me too. Like
Yes,
my comfort food.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's a habit that's been formed over time. And just like a path in the woods, the more you walk it, the more defined it becomes.
That's a great analogy. So you're saying it's like our habits create these pathways in our brains that become easier and easier to follow.
Exactly. And the more we repeat those behaviors, the stronger those pathways become.
Okay, so that makes sense. But if so much of this is happening beneath the surface, how do we even begin to become aware of our own habits?
Right. That's the first step. And the chapter talks about this really interesting tool called the Habit Scorecard.
Habits scorecard.
Okay.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, imagine you're taking a look at your morning routine and you just list out all the things you do. Like, waking up, checking your phone, brushing your teeth, making breakfast, all the usual stuff.
So like hitting the snooze button 5 times would probably get a big fat minus.
Well, maybe not a minus, but it's something to consider, right? The idea is to mark each activity as either a positive, a negative, or a neutral habit.
Okay, so it's not really about good or bad habits. It's more about figuring out which behaviors are helping us become the person we want to be and which ones might be holding us back.
Exactly. It's about awareness and understanding the impact of our habits.
This is reminding me of that paramedic story, you
Yeah.
know? Her expertise allowed her to pick up on these subtle cues that everyone else missed.
Right.
It's like the habit scorecard is our way of developing that kind of expertise for our own lives.
Absolutely. And just like there's no one right way to be a paramedic, there are no universally good or bad habits. It all depends on your individual goals and values.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we've got this habit scorecard to kind of shine a light on our, autopilot behaviors. But let's get practical. How do we actually fill it out? What should we be looking for?
Well, the chapter provides a really helpful sample list of common morning routine activities. You can start there and see which ones resonate with you.
Okay, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. That's good to know.
But remember, the key is to be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
No judgment, just observation.
So it's not about beating ourselves up over our so-called bad habits.
Hmm.
It's more about just noticing them without judgment.
Exactly. Think of it like a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. You're not trying to change it. You're just trying to understand it.
Okay, no judgment, just observation.
Yeah.
Got it. But now I'm thinking, what if some of my habits are so deeply ingrained that I don't even realize I'm doing them? How do I even begin to notice those?
That's a great question. And it leads us to one of the most fascinating aspects of habit formation, the power of cues. It's like that paramedic we were talking about. She could sense something was wrong with her father-in-law just by these little things.
Yeah, like what kinds of things?
Like maybe a slight change in his face or how he was breathing, tiny cues that most people wouldn't even pick up on.
And you're saying our habits work the same way.
Exactly. They're triggered by all these tiny little cues that we might not even realize are happening.
So like what kinds of cues are we talking about?
Well, it could be the time of day, like you always have a cookie at 3 p.m., or it could be a certain place, like as soon as you sit on the couch, you grab the remote.
Oh yeah, or like when I walk into the kitchen, I automatically open the fridge, even if I'm not really hungry.
Exactly. Or it could even be a certain emotion. Like if you're feeling stressed, maybe you always bite your nails or something.
Okay, so those are the cues, but how do we actually stop ourselves from doing the habit once we notice the cue? I mean, I know I should go for a run after work,
Yeah.
but it's so easy to just plop down on the couch instead.
Yeah, that's where the chapter talks about this thing called implementation intentions, and it sounds more complicated than it is.
Implementation intentions. Okay, I'm listening.
Basically, it means you make a very specific plan for when and where you're going to do this new habit.
So instead of just saying, I want to exercise more, I would say, when I get home from work, I'm going to change into my workout clothes and go for a 20-minute walk.
Exactly. And the research shows that when people make these super specific plans, they're way more likely to actually do the thing.
So it's like I'm giving my brain an if-then statement. If I finish work, then I go for a walk.
I like that if-then. That's a good way to put it.
So basically, I'm taking the decision-making out of it. I'm not giving myself the chance to talk myself out of it.
Right, because once that if-then plan is in place, your brain can just go on autopilot.
So my brain loves efficiency, so I'm just making things easier for it.
Exactly.
That actually makes a lot of sense. But what about those times when I'm like really craving something, even though I know I shouldn't?
Like when your willpower just isn't strong enough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, I know I should eat a salad, but that chocolate cake is calling my name.
Well, in those moments, that's where mindful observation comes in. You remember how we talked about looking at our habits like a scientist?
Yeah.
So mindful observation is about just noticing those cravings and urges, but without judging yourself for having them.
So it's not about beating myself up for wanting the cake. It's just about acknowledging the craving.
Exactly. Because when you can just observe it without judgment, you create this space where you can choose how to respond.
So instead of just automatically giving in to the craving,
Uh,
I can actually stop and ask myself, do I really want this?
And in that moment of awareness, you might realize that you don't actually want the cake that much, or maybe you decide to have a small piece instead of the whole thing.
So it's not about being perfect. It's about having more control over my choices.
Exactly. You're not just reacting on autopilot anymore. You're making conscious decisions.
It's like I'm hitting the pause button on my automatic responses and actually taking the wheel.
I like that analogy.
So mindful observation is like this superpower that helps me break free from my habits.
You could say that. And the more you practice it, the easier it becomes.
This is all making so much sense now. It's like all the pieces are starting to come together.
Mm.
The habit scorecard helps me figure out what habits I want to change, implementation, intentions, give me a plan for making those changes. And mindful observation helps me stay on track even when things get tough.
I think you've got it. And the best part is that all of these techniques are really simple. They don't require any special equipment or expensive programs.
It's like we have all the tools we need right inside of us.
We do.
Okay, so we've got the awareness, we've got the plan now. What are some practical ways to actually make those new habits stick? Because it's one thing to know what to do, but actually doing it is a whole other story.
That's where the rubber meets the road, right? And luckily, the chapter has some really helpful advice on this.
So we've been talking about all these great ways to identify our habits and, make plans for changing them, but let's get real for a second. It's not always easy to stick with those new habits. It's like I have the best intentions, but then life gets in the way.
Oh, absolutely. It's so easy to fall back into those old patterns, especially when they're comfortable and familiar.
Right. It's like my bad habits are like a comfy old sweater that I just can't seem to get rid of.
Well, the chapter talks about the strategy called habit stacking, and it's all about using your existing habits to your advantage.
Habit stacking. Okay, I like the sound of that. Tell me more.
So think of it like this. You already have all these habits that you do automatically every day, right?
Yeah, like brushing my teeth or making coffee.
Exactly. So the idea is to take a new habit that you're trying to build and stack it on top of one of those existing habits.
So like if I want to start flossing every day, I could make it a habit to floss right after I brush my teeth.
Exactly. You're basically using that old habit as a trigger for the new one.
So it's like I'm hitching a ride on my existing habits.
That's a great way to put it. And because those old habits are already so automatic, it makes it much easier to stick with the new one.
It's like building a habit tower one block at a time.
I like that analogy. And you can use habit stacking for all sorts of things. Like if you want to start drinking more water, you could make it a habit to drink a glass of water every time you sit down at your desk.
Or if you want to be more mindful, you could make it a habit to take a few deep breaths every time you feel your phone vibrate.
Exactly. The possibilities are endless.
This is great.
Yeah.
I'm already thinking about all the habits I can stack.
And the best part is that it's a really simple technique. You don't need any special equipment or anything.
Just a little bit of creativity.
Right. And the chapter also mentions another technique called temptation bundling, which I think you'll find interesting.
Temptation bundling. Okay, that sounds a little dangerous. Tell me more.
Well, the idea is to pair something you need to do but maybe don't enjoy with something that you really like doing.
So, like, only letting myself watch my favorite TV show while I'm on the treadmill.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're basically bribing yourself to do the thing you don't want to do.
I mean, hey, if it works, it works.
And it actually does work because you're associating that less desirable activity with something pleasurable.
It's like tricking my brain into thinking that exercise is actually fun.
You could could say that. So temptation bundling is another great tool for building new habits.
Okay, so we've got habit stacking, we've got temptation bundling. Any other tips for making those new habits stick?
Well, the chapter also emphasizes the importance of starting small. It's so easy to get overwhelmed when we try to change everything at once.
Oh yeah, I'm totally guilty of that.
No.
I'd be like, okay, starting today, I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m., go for a run, meditate for an hour, and eat a perfectly healthy breakfast.
And then by day 2, you're exhausted and back to your old routine.
Exactly. So it's better to start with just one small change and then gradually add more over time.
Exactly. Like maybe start by just adding 5 minutes of exercise to your day.
Yeah.
Or cutting out one sugary drink.
Small changes lead to big results.
Exactly. And don't forget to celebrate those small wins. It's important to acknowledge your progress and give yourself credit for the effort you're putting in.
That's a great reminder. It's easy to get caught up in what we're not doing yet and forget to appreciate how far we've come.
Exactly. And remember that setbacks are a normal part of the process. You're not going to be perfect every day, and that's okay.
So it's not about never slipping up. It's about getting back on track as quickly as possible.
Exactly. Be kind to yourself. Learn from those setbacks and keep moving forward.
I love that. This has been such an eye-opening deep dive into the world of habits. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of how they work and how I can actually change them for the better.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, it all starts with awareness. Once you understand how habits work, you can start to take control of them instead of letting them control you.
Absolutely. And, thinking back to that paramedic story, it's amazing how our brains can pick up on these subtle cues and patterns without us even realizing it.
It's true, and just like that paramedic developed her intuition through years of experience and training, we can train our brains to develop healthier habits.
It's like we all have this inner paramedic just waiting to be unleashed.
I like that. And the more we practice these techniques, the stronger our inner paramedic will become.
So to all our listeners out there, if you're ready to take control of your habits and start living a more intentional life, remember that you have all the tools you need right inside of you.
You just have to start with one small step.
And who knows, maybe you'll even develop a sixth sense for spotting those healthy habits.
That would be amazing.
So thank you so much for joining us on this fascinating deep dive into the world of habits. It's been a pleasure as always.
The pleasure is all mine.
And to all our listeners out there, we'll see you next time for another deep dive into something amazing.